On the night of September 29, 2015, a shocking 911 call broke the silence in a small town in upstate New York. Thomas Clayton, a former hockey player, came home from a poker game to find his wife, Kelly, lying on the kitchen floor, lifeless. The scene was disturbing. There was no sign of forced entry, but Kelly had clearly been attacked. Bloodstains on the walls showed signs of a terrible struggle. As detectives started looking into what happened, they uncovered secrets that hinted at something much darker. What really took place that night? And who was responsible for Kelly's tragic death? The truth would soon reveal a shocking twist no one expected. Kelly Elizabeth Stage was born on August 1, 1980, in Elmira, New York. She was the youngest of 3 children of Elizabeth and Howard Stage, both of whom were beloved in the community, especially Howard, who had served as the longtime chief of the local volunteer fire department. Growing up, Kelly was surrounded by her loving family, which included her brother Lenny and her older sister Kim, who, being 10 years her senior, took on a protective role in Kelly's life. The Stage household was filled with warmth and affection, allowing each family member to thrive in their own way. Kelly attended a liberal arts-focused school where she excelled, not only making the honor roll, but also standing out as a cheerleader and softball player. Those who knew her described her as someone who easily saw the good in people and situations, always radiating positivity and a zest for life. Her optimistic and outgoing nature made her naturally attract others. In 1998, Kelly graduated with a degree in education from the State University of New York, and though many assumed she would begin teaching immediately, she surprised everyone by taking a different path. She packed her bags and moved to Las Vegas, where she started working as a cocktail waitress. However, the pull of home was strong, and by 2000, she returned to Elmira to spend Christmas with her family. During this trip, she met Thomas Clayton, a man she would soon fall in love with. Thomas, a native of Binghamton, had graduated in 1998 and joined Elmira's minor league professional hockey team, where he played forward for 4 seasons. He quickly became a local star, enjoying the attention and admiration that came with his status. Some claimed that fame gave him a sense of entitlement, and he was known to engage in multiple romantic affairs simultaneously. His reckless behavior even led to an arrest after dancing naked on a bar table. Despite his wild side, Thomas and Kelly's paths crossed at a hockey game, and they were instantly drawn to each other. That same night, they ran into each other at a local bar, and their relationship blossomed from there. The couple was inseparable, and within a year they married, with Kelly taking her husband's surname and becoming known as Kelly Clayton. Around this time, Thomas's hockey career came to an abrupt end due to an injury. After retiring from the sport, the couple settled in the small town of Caton, New York, where Thomas became the owner of a franchise that specialized in water and fire damage restoration. In 2008, their first child, a daughter named Charlie, was born, and Kelly embraced motherhood with an overwhelming sense of love and devotion. A few years later, the birth of their son Cullen brought even more joy into Kelly's life, as she devoted herself entirely to her family. To those on the outside, the Claytons seemed like the perfect, happy family. Thomas focused on running his business, while Kelly balanced waitressing at a local restaurant and caring for their 2 children. Everything seemed idyllic until tragedy struck in 2015. On the night of September 29, 2015, Kelly was at home with her children while Thomas was out playing poker at a friend's house. Just after midnight, Thomas made a frantic call to 911, reporting that he had found his wife lying unresponsive on the floor. When the local sheriff's office and New York State Police arrived at the scene, a paramedic confirmed Kelly had died. Initial forensic evidence revealed she had been brutally beaten to death. Investigators found no signs of forced entry, leading them to believe that Kelly's killer may have been someone she knew. A trail of blood led from the upstairs to the kitchen, where Kelly's body was discovered, indicating that she had tried to flee during the attack. A hole in the wall at the bottom of the staircase was evidence of the sheer violence of the assault, and blood spatter on the walls and floors pointed to her having been struck repeatedly with a blunt object. While questioning Thomas and neighbors in the hours following the murder, a critical piece of evidence came from an unexpected source: Kelly's daughter, Charlie. The 7-year-old told the county sheriff that she had seen a man hurting her mother. During her conversation with the officer, Charlie revealed a chilling detail. She described how her mother had run down the hallway, yelling for her to escape. But the most haunting part of her account came when she mentioned that although the attacker had been wearing a hood, his eyes looked just like her father's. At that moment, authorities called in a child forensic investigator to assist with talking to Charlie about the traumatic event. A second interview with her took place at the county's Child Advocacy Center, where every question revolved around Thomas. According to Charlie, the mask worn by the assailant resembled one her father used when he went hunting. When asked to describe the man's size, Kelly's daughter, Charlie, said he was as tall as her father. She also pointed out a similarity in the jeans the man was wearing. Although suspicion toward Thomas grew due to the child's statements, he was at a friend's house that night, about 20 miles from his home, a drive of roughly 30 minutes. Furthermore, when he discovered Kelly's body and rushed to a neighbor's house to call 911, there was no blood on his hands or clothes, and he hadn't had enough time to clean himself up. The police were left with several unanswered questions. Thomas's alibi was corroborated by others who were with him that night. However, investigators learned that Thomas had borrowed a woman's cell phone to make a call only 90 minutes before returning home and finding Kelly's body. This raised more doubts. As the hours passed, the preliminary autopsy report on Kelly's body was released. It revealed that she had died from severe head trauma and damage to the lower part of her brain. In addition, her body was covered in bruises. She had abrasions, fractures to her face, and a serious contusion on her right hip. According to the forensic expert, the blows were so brutal that Kelly's body was almost unrecognizable, making it difficult to estimate her age and appearance. She also had defensive wounds on her arms and hands, including broken fingers, which indicated she had fought for her life. With the growing suspicion surrounding Thomas, investigators analyzed his cell phone records and noticed a high volume of messages and calls that pointed to a mysterious connection with a man named Michael Beard. In fact, Beard was the person Thomas had called the night of the murder. Michael Beard was a worker living in Elmira, in an apartment owned by the Clayton family. He had previously worked for Thomas's business and was often invited to do jobs around the family property. At the time of the crime, however, Beard had recently been fired from a similar company that also specialized in home restoration after fires and floods. State police investigators questioned Michael Beard multiple times over the next few days. Initially, he denied any involvement, but on October 2, 2015, After getting caught in several contradictions, he eventually broke down and confessed. In an unrecorded interview, Beard admitted that he had killed Kelly. He revealed chilling details, stating that Thomas had paid him $10,000 to carry out the murder. Beard then led the investigators to the place where he had hidden the murder weapon, a hammer handle stained with blood, which was found not far from the Clayton home. Beard also handed over the blood-stained clothes he wore that night and directed the authorities to a creek where he had tossed the keys to the family's home, given to him by Thomas. Forensic analysis of the blunt object used in the attack confirmed that the DNA matched Kelly's blood. Investigators determined that Beard had worn gloves during the murder, and though he had tried to dispose of them to eliminate DNA evidence, he failed to do so because the gloves belonged to Thomas. As more evidence pointed to Thomas, other discoveries raised further suspicions about him. Notably, a year before the incident, Thomas had doubled Kelly's life insurance policy from $500,000 to $1 million. During a media interview, Kelly's sister didn't hesitate to assert that Thomas stood to benefit from her death. The case became clear and justice began to move forward. With Charlie's testimony, the evidence collected, and Michael Beard's confession, prosecutors concluded that Kelly's death was a murder for hire. Both men were charged with first and second-degree murder, and it was announced that their trials would be held separately. However, a third arrest shocked everyone. Mark Blandford, another suspect, was charged with second-degree murder, robbery, and conspiracy. According to the investigation, Michael Beard had been recruited to act as a lookout and help commit a robbery at the Clayton home. He claimed he never had direct contact with Thomas and wasn't aware of any conspiracy to commit murder. His understanding was that he would be participating in a burglary. As the days passed, tensions rose during Thomas Clayton's arraignment, revealing a clear divide between the two families who had once been on good terms. Thomas's supporters sat on one side of the courtroom, while Kelly's relatives and friends occupied the other. At the hearing, Thomas pleaded not guilty. His lawyer argued that Thomas had no involvement in the crime, pointing out that his alibi was solid. GPS data from his car confirmed that he was miles away, playing poker when Kelly was killed. The defense also noted that Thomas had passed a polygraph test. However, the prosecution countered by stating that the GPS evidence was irrelevant since the charges were based on a murder-for-hire plot. They also opposed the use of the polygraph test in the trial, arguing that it should not be admitted as evidence. Kelly's murder garnered significant media attention, stirring feelings of outrage and sadness within the community. Purple ribbons lined the streets, and posters demanding justice for Kelly were displayed throughout the town. For Kelly's family, the tragedy was immeasurable. Her two young children were now left without a mother, and their father was in prison. The emotional toll was immense, but so was the financial strain, as Kelly's sister, who was granted custody of the kids, suddenly faced the challenge of raising and supporting two young children. Friends and relatives rallied for support to help the children through this difficult time. In February 2016, Thomas was released from prison after posting an $850,000 bail. While awaiting trial, the judge lifted the protective order that had barred him from his home, allowing him access since the crime scene had been cleared, and the children no longer lived there. Michael Beard was the first to go to trial, but in the days leading up to it, he shockingly recanted his confession, which had not been recorded. He claimed that Thomas had hired him to burn down the house, which was supposed to be empty, to collect insurance money. According to Beard, when he arrived, he found Kelly's body and heard the children upstairs, at which point he abandoned his mission and left. Michael's defense attorney argued that his client had been coerced by the police into signing a false confession and that they would present evidence in court to prove this. On October 25th, Beard pleaded not guilty before a jury of 8 men and 4 women. He even referred to Kelly as a friend, expressing sympathy for her family. The prosecution, however, remained confident that the testimony and evidence would show that Michael and Thomas had conspired together. Despite Beard's change of story, the prosecution presented the details of his signed confession, which was read aloud during the testimony of the New York State Police investigator who had been present when Beard initially explained the events. In the confession, Beard said that Thomas had asked him to do something that could land him in prison, and though he didn't initially specify what, the tone of Thomas's request had shocked the investigator. Beard had first refused, but ultimately agreed after Thomas threatened him. Desperate for money due to unemployment, Beard accepted the offer of $10,000, with Thomas promising to provide a vehicle, a weapon, and the keys to the house. The plan was to enter the house when the children were not home, kill Kelly, and then set the house on fire to cover up the crime, making it look like a candle had caused the blaze. On the night of September 28th, Beard entered the home, went upstairs, and found Kelly lying in bed. He struck her with a blunt object, and though Kelly fought back, stumbling through the upper floor of the house, she eventually fell down the stairs. Despite being injured, she made it to the kitchen, where Beard attacked her again, delivering the fatal blows to her head. According to another investigator, Thomas had been supposed to call Beard that night as a signal, but Beard was instructed not to answer the phone. Phone records revealed that Beard's phone was turned on and off 7 times that night, the last time being at 11:45 p.m. It remained off until 1:12 a.m. on September 29th. The trial included extensive forensic evidence, such as Michael's DNA found on the blunt object used to kill Kelly. Michael's attorney argued that his client's confession was coerced, claiming he had feared his wife would be implicated if he didn't take responsibility. The defense also pointed to the lack of direct evidence, such as fingerprints, and questioned the reliability of witnesses, suggesting they had been influenced or had misunderstood what had happened on the night of the crime. After a 2-week trial, Michael Beard was found guilty of 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree manslaughter. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The reaction from Kelly's family and friends was one of an immense relief and satisfaction. Kelly's sister publicly called Michael a coward who deserved the harshest sentence. Bringing Thomas, Kelly's husband, to justice proved more challenging. His trial began in January 2017. The case against him was complicated because all physical evidence pointed to Michael, and the district attorney couldn't use Michael's confession or call him as a witness due to Beard's retraction of his earlier statement. Instead, the prosecution relied on phone records and GPS data to build their case against Thomas, alongside a mountain of circumstantial evidence and testimony from women who claimed to have had affairs with him while he was married to Kelly. The testimonies of these women provided another potential motive for the crime. Prosecutors argued that Thomas, a businessman and former hockey player, no longer loved his wife, which was evidenced by his numerous affairs. 3 women testified that Thomas often complained about Kelly, using derogatory terms to describe her, and told them he planned to leave her because she was lazy and ungrateful. However, he also admitted to one of his lovers that he couldn't divorce Kelly because she would take everything. One of the most shocking testimonies came from a minor who was 15 years old when she had been involved with Thomas. Another key witness was a former police officer who owned a private investigation firm. He was able to cross-reference phone records and determine that Thomas and Michael had been together at various points leading up to the crime. It was also shown that Michael left his home shortly before 11 p.m. on the night of the murder, right after receiving a call from the man who had hired him. The prosecutor concluded that Thomas had masterminded the plan to end his marriage and had found the perfect scapegoat in his former employee, Michael. Thomas's defense centered on the argument that he was being falsely accused, claiming that Michael had acted alone with the sole intent of robbing the house. The prosecution called 65 witnesses and presented over 400 pieces of evidence, while the defense presented 10 witnesses and conducted rigorous cross-examinations. 7 weeks after the trial began, the jury deliberated for only 6 hours before delivering their verdict. On February 23, 2017, Thomas was found guilty of first- and second-degree murder. After the verdict was read, Kelly's sister presented a letter that Charlie, Kelly's daughter, had written for the court. In it, Charlie expressed her love for both her mother and father, but called her dad a coward for making Michael kill her mom. Kelly's sister also stated that raising the children allowed her to keep her sister's memory alive and ensure that Kelly's legacy as a loving mother would never be forgotten. Thomas's family stood by him throughout the trial, and after the guilty verdict, his father expressed pride in calling him his son. The sentencing hearing took place nearly 2 months later. Thomas Clayton was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and was ordered to serve his time in a New York State correctional facility. As for the third man charged in connection with the crime, it was revealed that he had reached a plea deal with prosecutors. He pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter in exchange for testifying against Thomas and received a sentence of 3 to 6 years in prison. In October 2018, Thomas appealed his conviction, bringing the case back into the public eye. His lawyers argued that the evidence presented at the trial, particularly the cell phone data used to track movements, was unreliable and untested. They also maintained that the prosecution had failed to prove Thomas's guilt. Despite their efforts, the appeal was denied, leaving limited options for future legal challenges. On January 20, 2023, more than 6 years after the crime, a major television network aired a true crime documentary which reignited public interest in the case. Michael Beard participated in the program, supposedly to clarify his side of the story. In the interview, he continued to claim his innocence, asserting that both Thomas and the police had set him up and that he had nothing to do with Kelly's murder. Beard stated that when he found Kelly's body, he didn't check if she was alive or call 911 because he wanted to get out of the situation as quickly as possible. He explained that, as a black man, the mere thought of being found in the home of a dead white woman in the middle of the night terrified him. Beard also claimed that he had encountered someone else inside the house, but was unable to see their face, as the person knocked him down while fleeing. Thomas refused to be interviewed for the program, while Kelly's family shared that her children were doing well, growing up happy despite everything they had been through. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. In early April 2011, for the first time in years, the shutters of house number 55 on Boulevard Robert Schumann remained closed. This house, located in a residential neighborhood of Nantes, France, belonged to the Dupont de Ligonnès family. The family comprised Xavier, Agnès, and their 4 teenage children. The unusual silence around the usually lively home caught the neighbors' attention. Typically filled with the sounds of the children and their 2 dogs, the sudden quiet was alarming. Known for keeping their shutters open even when on vacation, the closed shutters prompted the neighbors to alert the local police, fearing something might have happened. During an initial inspection, the officers found no trace of the family. However, it was on the 5th inspection that they made a horrific discovery. Located in the western suburbs of Paris, Versailles is the birthplace of Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès, born on March 9, 1961. He was the eldest son of the French Count Bernard Hubert Dupont de Ligonnès and his wife Geneviève Thérèse Maître. In 1966, the family welcomed a daughter named Christine. When Bernard left his wife for a lover, Xavier assumed a leadership role within his family, taking care of his mother and sister Christine. Geneviève claimed to receive divine messages, which she recorded during automatic writing sessions, similar to a surrealist poet. Her peculiar beliefs evolved into sermons about an impending apocalypse, leading her to establish a cult named the Church of Philadelphia. The group included members of the aristocracy, whom Geneviève convinced were chosen to survive the apocalypse and partake in the world's renewal. Christine was designated by her mother to bear the Savior. According to Geneviève, the child would be a reincarnation of both Jesus and Satan, destined to bring salvation. Despite inheriting his father's noble title, Xavier showed little interest in French traditions, instead being fascinated by luxury, high-end cars, and eccentricities. He also admired the United States greatly. Geneviève funded Xavier's lavish lifestyle through significant contributions from cult members who were sworn to secrecy about their activities. In 1974, on the paradisiacal island of Bréhat, Xavier met Emmanuel Teneur. The 2 boys formed a deep bond of mutual understanding, which lasted throughout their lives. It is said that Emmanuel even confessed his love for Xavier at that time, but despite the rejection, their close friendship remained intact. 2 years later, Xavier met Agnès Hodange. The girl was born on November 9, 1962, in Neuilly-sur-Seine, just outside Paris. She stood out for her deep religious devotion. She worked as an assistant at the Blanche de Castille Catholic School in Nantes, where her responsibilities included teaching catechism. Although little is known about her family background, it is well documented that Xavier and Agnès developed a close relationship, leading to a passionate but brief romance before they went their separate ways. In 1990, Agnès gave birth to her first child, Arthur, from a casual relationship. Soon after, she and Xavier reunited, rekindled their love, and decided to marry. Xavier adopted Arthur as his own son. 2 years later, they welcomed their first son together, Thomas, the heir to the family name. To commemorate the occasion, Xavier chose Emmanuel as Thomas's godfather. Following Thomas, the couple had 2 more children, Anne and Benoit. The family of 6 seemed to embody the ideal family, with Xavier appearing as a loving father and the children excelling academically, suggesting a promising future. Agnes was dedicated to instilling her faith in her children, frequently taking them to Mass. Other parishioners saw her as kind but firm with her children. Around the year 2000, in line with their interests and preferences, Xavier moved his family to the United States. Xavier, a discreet, charismatic, and multilingual man, believed he could blend in seamlessly in the United States. However, this venture failed, leading to significant financial losses. Upon returning to France, he began accumulating substantial debts related to his professional activities, which were always somewhat ambiguous. Various investigations have described him as a salesman. According to French media reports, money troubles had been a significant concern for Xavier for several years. One of his failed ventures included an unusual scheme to import cars from the United States to France. He also started several small businesses, all of which saw limited success. These included a hotel and restaurant guide for sales representatives, a customer loyalty system for restaurants, an association called the French Federation of Commerce, and a discreet business where he was listed as the manager. The accounts for this last enterprise were minimal, and in 2003, he hired 6 salespeople. Xavier's work often took him away from home from Monday to Friday and brought in a meager income, around $4,200 annually in declared earnings. Gradually, financial issues began to strain his marriage, likely exacerbated by typical marital disagreements. In 2004, Agnes wrote extensively on a French forum, detailing the challenges she and her husband faced. Notably, she mentioned that he had once told her that a group death as a family wouldn't be catastrophic. By 2009, the increasing debts severely impacted their relationship, leading to a temporary separation. During this period, Xavier sent numerous letters blaming Agnes for the family's troubles and holding her responsible for their financial ruin. This emotional turmoil took a toll on Agnes, causing her to lose her appetite and struggle with insomnia. On numerous occasions, Xavier turned to his friend Emmanuel for assistance. Emmanuel, hailing from a wealthy family, had inherited a substantial fortune from his father. Despite his wealth, Emmanuel lived modestly in a small apartment. An enigmatic and somewhat eccentric individual, he never hesitated to lend Xavier significant sums of money. In addition to financial support, Emmanuel funded Xavier's travels and even co-signed for the house where Xavier eventually settled with his family in the late 2000s. Thanks to Emmanuel's generosity, the family resided in a chalet located in the suburbs at 55 Boulevard Robert Schumann, west of Nantes. Once settled, the neighbors quickly formed the impression that Agnes was bossy and less pleasant than her husband. Behind closed doors, Agnes faced a personal hell. She viewed Xavier as both too fragile and paradoxically too rigid, almost militaristic. An old-fashioned man, he played the head of the household but was emotionally distant, lacking tenderness and affection, and sometimes even abusive. Furthermore, Agnes confided in her friends from the Thursday prayer group about her fears of how Geneviève controlled Xavier. She described her mother-in-law as a mentally ill mystic and was deeply afraid. On January 20th, 2011, Bernard passed away. Given the disparity between his lifestyle and financial difficulties, Xavier hoped his father's death would result in an inheritance. However, he was in for a shock. Upon delving into his father's estate, he found nothing substantial. All that remained were a few papers, a rifle, a card, a ring, and some cash, which Xavier promptly took. Within hours of Bernard's death, Xavier withdrew cash using his father's card. On February 2nd, he acquired a firearms license, and by March 12th, he had purchased a silencer for the rifle. During this period, he also bought quicklime. He practiced shooting the rifle in his garden, aiming at a balloon on a stand. Emmanuel, who was visiting, tried the rifle and saw nothing suspicious. Xavier explained that the silencer was to avoid disturbing the neighbors. On Friday, April 1st, the two friends went to a shooting range together, where Bernard's inherited rifle was a focal point of interest. The following day, Emmanuel called Xavier 5 times and they spoke for nearly an hour. Investigation suggests that the horror began on Sunday, April 3rd. That night, Xavier, Agnes, and their children went to the movies and later enjoyed a pleasant evening dining at a restaurant. Everyone was present except for Thomas, who was studying at a Catholic university and lived in a nearby student hostel. After their night out, the family returned to their chalet where neighbors saw them and some family members even exchanged text messages with friends and acquaintances. Xavier messaged Christine, telling her about their dinner outing. The most accepted theory is that Xavier drugged his wife and children, waited until they were asleep, then shot them and buried them in the garden. He also did the same to the family's 2 Labrador dogs. Xavier's alibi was as macabre as his actions. On Monday morning, he began contacting people related to his family circle from as early as 6 a.m. He called Agnes's workplace to say she was sick and contacted the children's schools, claiming Arthur, Agnes's son from a previous relationship, had a motorcycle accident and that Anne and Benoit were ill. By midday, he sent a letter to the restaurant where Arthur worked, saying Arthur was resigning because his father had been transferred to Australia. He still had Thomas to deal with. On that same Monday, April 4th, Xavier contacted Thomas and had dinner with him at a restaurant near his university residence. After the meal, a tired Thomas returned to his room. The following day, Thomas received an urgent message from his father, claiming that Agnes had a bicycle accident and was in a mild coma at a hospital, prompting Thomas to travel immediately to Nantes. It is presumed that Xavier killed Thomas in the same manner as his siblings and mother. Later that evening, Emmanuel spoke with Xavier again, and this time they talked for just under 19 minutes. At midnight, a friend of Thomas received a message from him, stating he was home watching a movie with his father. Thomas was likely already dead by then. About an hour later, Xavier sent an email to Emmanuel, arranging to meet soon. Emmanuel replied, reminding Xavier that he had power of attorney and that the key was on the sailboat. Contrary to what one might expect, Xavier did not act discreetly. He went in and out of his house, even leaving a note on the door asking not to deliver any more mail. Instead of hiding, he withdrew cash from ATMs and his image was captured by security cameras. He paid with his credit cards at restaurants and stayed in hotels under his real name. As Xavier's perfect escape began, neighbors gradually noticed troubling signs. The once open windows of the chalet had been closed for days. The local children no longer saw the family's 4 children. The dogs barking had ceased, and Agnes hadn't returned to work. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Piecing together the clues, the concerned neighbors contacted the authorities. Upon arrival, officers found a nearly empty refrigerator with only a few jars of preserves. They discovered a still damp mop in the kitchen, a chess set on the living room table, and guitars on a sofa. It seemed the Dupont de Ligonnès family had vanished. The scene was eerie. Beds were stripped of sheets, picture frames were empty, and closets had missing clothes. In the midst of the mystery, on April 9th, a letter surfaced, sent to family and friends. It claimed that Xavier had been hired by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration and that the family had to leave undercover as part of a witness protection program, explaining their sudden disappearance and lack of communication. Suspicion and worry grew among neighbors who felt there was something off about this story. Fearing for the family's lives, they urged authorities to investigate further. Meanwhile, Xavier embarked on a journey through southern France in his car. As the case gained media attention, more details from the past emerged. On April 15th, security cameras captured Xavier entering a small hotel near Cannes. He parked his car, took a bag, and disappeared into the nearby woods. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. Curiously, on that same day, Emmanuel called his mother, revealing long-held secrets. He was homosexual, alcoholic, and depressed. Responding to the neighbors' pleas and lack of leads, authorities revisited the family home. On April 21, 2011, a freshly disturbed patch of earth under a terrace caught an officer's attention. They soon uncovered a concrete slab and moments later made a grim discovery. The bodies of Agnes and her 4 children were found, wrapped in bags, each with 2 to 3 gunshot wounds and covered in religious symbols. They had been meticulously buried in burlap sacks with quicklime. The family's 2 Labradors were also found buried. Despite the thorough search, no traces of blood, fingerprints, or DNA were found. Xavier became the most wanted man in France, accused of the massacre. His face dominated the news, earning him titles such as the Most Wanted Man, the Nantes Killer, and the Face of Horror. Yet, it seemed he had mysteriously vanished from the face of the earth. The autopsy results of the 5 bodies revealed to authorities that they were dealing with a meticulously planned execution. Most of the bullets had been fired into the victims' heads. Additionally, traces of a sedative were found in the children, confirming the hypothesis that they were attacked while sleeping. A startling detail emerged regarding Agnes. In the master bedroom, investigators found a device she used to manage her sleep apnea, which had stopped functioning at precisely 3:27 a.m. on April 4th. Investigators speculated that Xavier might have hesitated to kill Thomas, as he was the heir to the family name. Due to the close bond between Xavier and Emmanuel, the latter was summoned by the authorities. Emmanuel appeared cooperative during these initial inquiries, expressing his belief that Xavier's disappearance was a sort of pilgrimage before committing suicide. When questioned about the rifle, Emmanuel initially denied knowledge of it. However, deeper investigation into his life revealed inconsistencies, and authorities soon realized that he was not entirely who he claimed to be. A significant development occurred 24 hours later. Just before noon, Nantes police searched Emmanuel's apartment. They confiscated his laptop, and Emmanuel then disclosed what he truly knew about Xavier's rifle. A subsequent examination of the hard drive uncovered extensive correspondence between Emmanuel and Xavier. These exchanges range from mundane to philosophical, with some emails adding a peculiar tone to their relationship. One email, sent in the early hours of April 6th, particularly caught the police's attention. These accumulated details led investigators to suspect that Emmanuel might have assisted in Xavier's escape. But Emmanuel was not the only suspect. Christine also drew the investigators' scrutiny. During their interviews, Christine and Geneviève were evasive, painting a superficial picture of Xavier and denying any knowledge of the Church of Philadelphia. Geneviève spoke about Xavier's childhood, but avoided uncomfortable topics such as the source of their income, and she outright denied the existence of the sect. However, The diligence of the investigative team paid off. They discovered a copy of a complaint filed years earlier by former sect members who had fled in fear after Christine proposed to have sex with all the men to conceive the chosen one. This revelation about the sect, which included wealthy members providing financial support, was crucial. Investigators believe this environment might have offered Xavier logistical and material assistance. As a result, all former members of the Church of Philadelphia were interrogated, and the police monitored the sect's followers, hoping to catch any slip-ups in conversation or email. Despite these efforts, no definitive leads emerged. Meanwhile, Xavier's cell phone records allowed authorities to trace his movements within the country. The last concrete trace of Xavier was a security recording from April 15th. Investigators speculated that he was carrying the weapon in his bag based on its shape. While everything suggested he might have committed suicide in the woods, the detectives were puzzled as exhaustive searches in the dense forest yielded no body or remains. This led to the theory that Xavier might have been picked up by a boat and taken to another country. Consequently, an international arrest warrant was issued. On May 4th, Nantes police contacted the National Center for Fisheries Monitoring to verify if Emmanuel or Xavier owned a motorboat or sailboat. They found nothing, although they knew the records might not be fully up to date. On May 9th, Emmanuel was summoned to the Nantes police station for another interview, which was, in fact, an interrogation. The police were now focused on finding a boat and identifying its captain. At this point, Emmanuel was unaware of the depth of the investigation or the suspicions surrounding him. When questioned about a reference to a sailboat, Emmanuel explained it as a coincidence. He revealed that he had given Xavier power of attorney to access his safe deposit box. Should anything happen to Emmanuel, the key was stored on a model sailboat in an apartment. The safe contained his will, and that was all. The police let Emmanuel go, feeling frustrated and empty-handed. Despite the coincidences, the investigation remained uncertain. At this stage, Emmanuel was seen merely as a witness. No arrests had been made, and the police debated the point of further interrogating him, though they decided to apply some pressure as he remained the most credible accomplice. A significant detail emerged when investigators reviewed all checks issued to Xavier's company. They found an unusual check for $4,200 signed by Emmanuel. The address on the check indicated a previously unknown account in Monaco. An immediate request for the account statements was sent, but Monaco's strict banking privacy laws meant the authorities there would only respond to their own regulatory agencies. On September 28th, 4 police officers visited Emmanuel's residence again. After long minutes, Emmanuel emerged, disoriented and in his underwear, barely able to confirm his identity. The sparse interior of his apartment was littered with empty alcohol bottles, reflecting a state of deep loneliness. Emmanuel had not received any letters or phone calls from his friend, and that was what tormented him. The police no longer saw him as a suspect but as a castaway, leading them to question if they were following the wrong lead. Xavier had become one of France's most wanted alleged murderers, possibly even globally. In 2015, a journalist claimed to have received a letter from Xavier stating he was alive. Handwriting, DNA, and fingerprint analyses were conducted, but the note did not yield any new information. On January 9, 2018, police raided a monastery in Roquebrune-sur-Argens after a tip-off about a monk resembling Xavier. After 2 hours of intense searching, they determined it was a case of mistaken identity. On January 18, 2019, Emmanuel died of a heart attack. That same year, authorities arrested a man they believed to be Xavier at Glasgow Airport in Scotland. Once again, it was a case of mistaken identity. Another theory suggested Xavier might be in South America, specifically Argentina, where his language skills and charisma could help him blend in. Years have passed, and the Church of Philadelphia has not only persisted, but has reportedly experienced a resurgence. This small, highly secretive group includes members who have been part of it for nearly 40 years, living as if withdrawn from the world. In the summer of 2019, two brothers raised within the sect filed new complaints against Christine and Genevieve. For 2 decades, these women have fervently preached that Xavier is alive, innocent, and hiding in the United States as part of a witness protection program. They claim everything written in the April 9th letter is pure fabrication. This might sound like denial, but it could also be a way to obscure certain truths. Since 2011, the case has been mired in speculation and false leads, sending authorities down endless labyrinths. The pressing question remains: will justice ever be served for Agnes and her children? Despite the bleak outlook, some believe that the truth will eventually come to light. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
You smothered her laugh, you crushed her smile, and you left us with the nightmare of the unimaginable.
Ingrid Marie Rounsaville was born on August 2, 1975, in Renton, Washington State. She was the only daughter of Yorga Bass, a devoted mother and her only known direct relative. Ingrid completed her high school education at Canyon del Oro High School in Tucson, Arizona, in 1993. Following graduation, she pursued a nursing degree at a local university and earned her Bachelor of Science in Nursing 4 years later. About 3 years after her graduation, Ingrid returned to Washington where she met Philip Line. The couple eventually married, and Ingrid took his surname, becoming Ingrid Line for the rest of her life. The joys of motherhood followed her marriage, with the birth of her daughters, Reese, Brooke, and Noelle, each born 2 years apart. Her daughters were consistently her greatest joy and purpose in life. Around 2014, Ingrid's marriage to Philip encountered difficulties, leading to a divorce that was finalized amicably, with both parents sharing custody of their daughters. Despite the separation, Ingrid retained her vibrant, energetic personality. At this time, she was working as a nurse at the Swedish Medical Center, where she was highly regarded by doctors, patients, and fellow staff for her dedication and professional commitment. Her career was undoubtedly the second most important aspect of her life. Her relationship with Philip evolved into a supportive friendship, easing the co-parenting of their daughters. This emotional maturity greatly benefited their children's upbringing. Additionally, the presence of Yorga, Ingrid's mother, was a constant source of support, playing a crucial role in her life and the lives of her granddaughters. 2 years post-divorce, by 2016, Ingrid was well settled. She enjoyed her job, which provided a satisfactory income, and lived with her 3 daughters in Renton, Washington, just a 32-minute drive from her workplace. Socially, she was fortunate to have genuine friendships, which enriched her life further. It could be said that Ingrid was content with her life, and she felt the same. Yet in her early 40s, she found herself longing for a romantic partner, a desire unmet by her social circle. Consequently, she decided to explore online dating. After encountering various men on the app, none seemed suitable for a deeper connection until she finally met someone who caught her interest. John Charlton, born in the late 1970s in Seattle, was the son of Ray and Joanne Charlton, both military personnel with strict expectations regarding the behavior of John and his sister Shannon. They aimed high for their children's futures, providing them with the best education possible and expecting them to help with household chores. However, it soon became clear that John was not living up to his parents' dreams. He harbored resentment towards them and others, a sentiment that followed him throughout his life. John's frustrations often surfaced, especially when he was under the influence of alcohol or drugs, substances to which he frequently turned. His legal troubles began in 1997 with a misdemeanor assault charge in King County, followed by a charge of reckless driving in Washington State the next year. Over time, the relationship between John and his parents deteriorated, reaching a breaking point in 2006 when, exhausted, Ray and Joanne sought a protective order against him. They had tried everything to make living together bearable, but their son's erratic and inexplicable behavior made basic agreements impossible. John's increasingly threatening demeanor led to the protective order request in Thurston County, where Ray stated that his son was verbally abusive and often tried to provoke fights. However, this request for a protective order was later denied. Ray informed the court that his son's problematic substance use stemmed from immense pressure he felt, which he believed was causing significant mental instability. On June 24, 2006, south of Ogden, a woman and her baby were waiting in the back seat of their van while her husband shopped in a bookstore. Suddenly, John appeared, demanded they exit the vehicle, and drove away with it. The police were promptly notified, and the van was spotted on Interstate 15. An officer followed it to a store parking lot in Riverdale, Utah, where John was arrested. According to Utah's police and judicial records, John was charged with aggravated robbery. He agreed to plead guilty to a lesser charge of attempted aggravated robbery and was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. However, he only served about 21 months and was released on June 24, 2008. Just a few months later, John added to his criminal record with a felony robbery conviction in Montana and a misdemeanor assault in Idaho. He spent approximately 3.5 years in prison before being released onto the streets in 2012. From that point on, details about his life became murky. One factor that perhaps made John more dangerous was his physical attractiveness. He was a handsome man with a charismatic personality when he chose to be. With these traits, he began to explore other ways of causing harm through romance and seduction, only to later unleash his anger. One thing was certain: John was not an ordinary person, and neither was his daily life. Around mid-2012, he took a temporary job where he started a relationship with a coworker named. Initially, she was taken in by his charm. However, there were some signs that, although not entirely clear to her, made her cautious. Something about him, something unsettling and mysterious in his demeanor. Trusting her instincts, she decided to end the relationship. By 2013, they had parted ways. After that, there was a string of women in his life, whose identities remained confidential for security reasons. These women were later consulted by authorities regarding John's criminal career and personality traits. In their subsequent statements, the ex-girlfriends revealed details such as aggressive and dangerous behavior, as well as confessions of major crimes he claimed to have committed, the veracity of which authorities were trying to ascertain. Broadly speaking, John lacked stability in both his work and personal life. Essentially a homeless day laborer, he would either sleep on the streets or stay at the homes of ex-girlfriends with whom he maintained casual relationships. Among his friends, John was known as a reserved individual, but alcohol and illicit substances would often transform him into someone nearly unrecognizable. This complex character, whose physical attractiveness often opened doors for him, was the same man Ingrid met through an online dating site. After exchanging messages and finding mutual interest, they agreed to meet in person. Their first date was set for Friday, April 8th. The plan was to watch the Seattle Mariners opening game and then, if things went well, go out for drinks afterward. On the eve of their date, Ingrid shared her plans with friends and coordinated with Philip so he could look after the girls that evening. On April 8th, John and Ingrid attended the baseball game, which started just after 7 p.m. They enjoyed themselves enough to continue the evening at a local bar. Around 10:35 p.m., Ingrid texted a friend to confirm that everything was going smoothly with her new acquaintance. However, the night took a sinister turn shortly after. It appears that Ingrid brought John back to her home. Instead of the intimacy she had hoped for, she met a tragic end. The seemingly pleasant man she met online revealed his darkest side. He not only took her life, but also dismembered her body using a sharp gardening tool. After cleaning the crime scene, he placed the parts into plastic bags he had found in the kitchen. He then took Ingrid's car keys and drove her vehicle, a 2015 Toyota Highlander, to Seattle, where he disposed of the remains. John likely continued to drink alcohol after disposing of the evidence, as he did not show up at his ex-girlfriend's house later that night or the next morning, even though she had expected him early on Saturday and was surprised by his absence. Meanwhile, that same morning, Philip arrived at his ex-wife's house around 10 a.m. to drop off the girls. Despite repeatedly knocking, he received no response. He then took a closer look around and noticed that Ingrid's vehicle, which was usually parked outside, was missing. This was particularly odd because he knew Ingrid was off work that day, which was why she had made plans to go out the previous night. Ingrid was a devoted mother who always wanted her daughters close by, and she was invariably at home when Phil brought them over. If her romantic evening had gone on longer than expected, they had a trusting enough relationship that she would have told him to keep the girls longer. Concerned by her absence, Phil repeatedly knocked on the door and tried calling her cell phone several times, all attempts unsuccessful. He then decided to contact Ingrid's mother. Shortly after, Jorga arrived with a spare set of keys Ingrid had given her for emergencies. Upon entering the house, they immediately noticed Ingrid's wallet, purse, and cell phone were left behind, but there was no sign of Ingrid herself. She quickly checked the last messages on her daughter's phone and saw messages from John about the date. She then sent a text to John, asking if he knew anything about Ingrid's whereabouts. He replied that they had indeed gone out the previous night but had parted ways after the game because she needed to return home to her daughters. She informed him that a police officer would need to speak with him since he might have been the last person to see her. After that, all communication from John ceased, prompting Ingrid's mother to alert the authorities. A few hours later, while the police began their investigation, a Seattle resident was about to make a horrifying discovery. As he was taking out his recycling, he noticed 3 white kitchen bags at the bottom of another bin, out of place because kitchen waste is organic and does not belong in the recycling. When he went to correct this mistake and picked up the first bag, he was struck by its unusual weight and nearly professional packaging. Seconds later, he was staring in horror at the outline of a face protruding from the bag. Shocked, he called a neighbor to confirm what he was seeing. Both, still in disbelief, contacted emergency services. The police and forensic team arrived within minutes. Inside those 3 bags were human remains, a leg and foot, part of an arm, and a head. Back in Washington, as panic spread among dozens of Ingrid's friends and family, they took to social media to alert the community, the police, and the media about her disappearance. Suspicion quickly fell on the man she had dated last. Meanwhile, John visited his ex-girlfriend's house. Though she noticed he had a swollen lip, he dismissed it as nothing significant. He claimed it was the result of an attempted robbery the night before he went out to a bar. Meanwhile, the Seattle police soon learned that their counterparts in Renton were searching for a missing woman. Coupled with social media posts, this information helped them connect the dots. After comparing the photos shared online with the remains found, they identified them as belonging to the same person. A search warrant was issued for Ingrid's home, where a thorough search revealed an almost empty box of garbage bags, similar to those found in the dumpster. Bloody traces were found in the bathtub drain, and perhaps most damning, a pruning saw with blood, tissue, and bone on its serrated blade was found leaning against the bathroom wall. The examination of Ingrid's computer allowed officers to access her purchase of tickets for the Mariners game. Considering the link she had with Phil, the police initially pursued this lead since an ex-husband might harbor resentments. However, he was quickly ruled out. The car was located in downtown Seattle on the night of April 11, 2016. The police lifted 3 fingerprints from underneath the driver's door handle, where they also found the same type of white garbage bags. Subsequently, the officers interviewed John. His online dating profile indicated he wasn't looking for anything serious, but that was not a crime. At first glance, he seemed like a normal guy. When asked about his residence to ensure they could contact him again if needed, he admitted to not having a fixed place to live. The officers sensed some discomfort when they asked about Ingrid. In his account, he said that after the baseball game, they took a bus and went to Ingrid's house. He believed there might have been an intimate encounter, but he wasn't sure because he had passed out. He added that she had not wanted to introduce him to her daughters and had later left him downtown. He woke up hours later on a bench in front of a building. Regarding his last interaction with Ingrid, or at least what he remembered of it, John claimed to have sent her a message that morning asking how she had slept. As the investigators delved deeper into his story, they uncovered his peculiar relationship with his ex-girlfriend, but that was not illegal either. John eventually asked for a lawyer. The officers left the room but did not stop the video recording. If everyone already thought he was odd, what happened next confirmed it. The cameras captured John rolling up his sweatshirt to use as a pillow while he took a nap on the floor. The next step involved interviewing John's ex-girlfriend, who reported that he arrived later than expected that Saturday and noted his bruised lip.
Wow, this could have been me.
However, this was not particularly surprising to the agents, as they had already observed an abrasion on his head and scratches on his chin, chest, and arms. Simultaneously, the analysis confirmed that the fingerprints on Ingrid's car matched John's. Consequently, on Monday, April 11, 2016, John was brought before a judge who set his bail at $5 million, a sum he could not afford, resulting in his detention as the primary suspect in Ingrid's murder. Several of John's former friends and ex-partners came forward to assist the police with the investigation. Additionally, an extensive search for the rest of Ingrid's body commenced, involving the FBI and other regional law enforcement agencies, due to the grisly nature of the crime. John was assigned a public defender who argued that no forensic evidence or expert testimony linked him to the crime. Nevertheless, on Tuesday, April 12th, the judge dismissed these arguments and found probable cause to hold him on a charge of second-degree murder. That evening, hundreds gathered near Ingrid's home for a vigil to honor her memory. Those who knew her highlighted her excellent human qualities, and friends present expressed that the pain of her loss felt like an open wound. They acknowledged that the hardest impact was on her family, particularly her mother and 3 daughters, who were deeply affected by the tragedy. The following day, Wednesday, April 13th, the county coroner's office officially confirmed that the remains were Ingrid's. The preliminary autopsy report listed blunt force trauma as the cause of death, although the exact date of the crime could not be determined. 2 days later, a sanitation worker found more body parts in a different recycling bin. On April 18th, a man received a phone call from a neighbor. Inside his recycling bin, a torso with a pierced navel was discovered. Ingrid had a navel piercing, confirming the remains were hers. As part of gathering evidence for the trial, police returned to Ingrid's house. This time, they dismantled the plumbing and found more blood in the newly exposed drain trap. They also used a chemical called luminol, which glows in the presence of blood traces, confirming that the crime scene had been cleaned. Despite the initial findings in the preliminary autopsy report, further examination of the body by the forensic pathologist revealed more details. Upon closer inspection, small signs of bleeding were found in Ingrid's eyes. Additionally, marks on her neck led to the definitive conclusion that she had been strangled, and subsequently, her body was dismembered in her own home. The toxicology report indicated that Ingrid had no drugs in her system, but her blood alcohol content was 0.74. On October 2, 2017, in a King County courtroom, John pled guilty to first-degree premeditated murder. His guilty plea was part of a plea bargain that resulted in a shortened trial, sparing Ingrid's family and the community from the ordeal of a lengthy and distressing jury trial. However, his plea was not solely an act of mercy to alleviate the victim's family's suffering. It also afforded him certain procedural benefits. The sentencing hearing took place on January 5, 2018. John's parents attended the court in a dual show of support for their son and respect for the grief that Ingrid's family was enduring. During his brief statement in court, John acknowledged that no words could suffice to ease the pain he had caused, admitting the irreversible harm of his actions. The impact statements from Ingrid's family then resonated deeply. Phil condemned John for taking away a vital companion and the mother of their children, lamenting the maternal guidance and cherished family moments that his daughters would now forever miss. He emphasized that due to John's actions, his daughters would never again receive maternal advice. A friend of Ingrid, visibly shaken, spoke to the brutality with which John ended her dear friend's life, labeling him a coward who initially tried to flee and hide. When finally cornered by the police, instead of owning up to his actions, he claimed he was too drunk to remember what he had done. Addressing John, the judge expressed her wish to imprison him for life if it were possible. Instead, she sentenced him to 27 years and 9 months in prison, adhering to the recommendation of the prosecutors as part of the plea deal that facilitated the shortened trial. Ultimately, the sentence handed down was the harshest possible under state sentencing guidelines. A member of John's defense team expressed hope that his guilty plea and the prison sentence might offer some closure and perhaps a measure of peace to Ingrid's loved ones. When the sentencing was reported in the media, there was significant public outcry. Many expressed their dismay, particularly because John could potentially be released by the age of 60. Furthermore, his failure to provide a motive for his actions did not work in his favor. No further arrests have been made in connection with Ingrid's disappearance. Her tragic death has sparked discussions and debates about the safety of online dating. Meanwhile, Phil has chosen to focus on the well-being of his daughters, as their mother would have wished. In this spirit, a fundraising page set up for the three young girls successfully gathered $270,000. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. In 2014, during a routine traffic stop in Smith County, Mississippi, an incredibly disturbing case came to light. The police were drawn to a truck due to a strong odor emanating from it. As the officer asked the driver for his paperwork, he observed that the man appeared anxious and confused. The vehicle reeked of decay, and upon further investigation, the driver was identified as 37-year-old Timothy Jones, Jr. The situation became even more concerning when the officers learned that Jones had 5 children. Yet, the truck was empty, containing only some clothing items. When asked about his children, Jones initially denied having any, then changed his story, claiming he had 3 children who were supposedly in South Carolina. This inconsistency raised suspicions, prompting the officer to detain Jones for further questioning. What they discovered rendered them speechless. Timothy Jones Jr. and Amber Kaiser, a divorced couple with 5 children all under the age of 9, Mara Grace, Elias Xavier, Natan Hayside, Gabriel Asher, and Elaine Marie. They lived in Lexington, South Carolina. When Amber met Timothy, she was drawn to his world and felt connected to him and his lifestyle. They were teenagers when they met and married very young. Timothy attended school in Mississippi while Amber focused on homemaking. From a young age, Timothy witnessed his mother's mental health deteriorate due to schizophrenia. She eventually required constant care and left home to work in intimate services, with his family telling Timothy she had simply gone far away and abandoned him. His father, Timothy Jones Sr., who was 20 at the time, moved with Timothy to his grandmother's house, where he was exposed to domestic violence, substance abuse, and alcohol. Despite his tough upbringing, Timothy showed a talent for numbers, solving math problems with ease, and could disassemble and reassemble computers to make them faster. He seemed to have a natural understanding of how machines worked. However, things changed when Timothy reached adolescence and began hearing voices at the age of 10. By middle school, he had started using drugs and drinking excessively. At 15, he suffered a traumatic brain injury in a car accident, which affected his frontal lobe, the brain area controlling impulses and linked to psychopathy in various studies. After the accident, Timothy's behavior became erratic and stubborn. He was also very jealous of his father, feeling that anyone who had a relationship with him took away his father's attention. Over time, Timothy believed his father didn't love him and feared he would end up abandoned. Despite his growing intelligence, his emotional development was stunted, leaving him with the mentality of a child and lacking common sense and empathy. After finishing high school, Timothy Jones Jr. dreamed of joining the elite U.S. Navy SEALs. His intelligence earned him a chance to study there, but he faced a major hurdle. He lacked athletic talent and discipline, lasting only a few weeks in training. Often found crying out of frustration, he struggled to keep up with the rigorous demands. This led to depression, and a subsequent drug test revealed substance abuse, resulting in his expulsion. In 2000, Timothy began associating with individuals involved in bad things. One day, the police found him in possession of illegal substances and discovered he had been writing checks in his father's name. The police warned Jones's father that he had to press charges against his son or face arrest himself. In 2001, Timothy Jones Jr. was sent to a labor camp in an Illinois state prison for a year. Upon release, he seemed transformed, having found religion as a guiding force in his life. He memorized significant portions of religious texts and aspired to live strictly by them. Jones met Amber, the mother of his children, while they both worked at an amusement park in Chicago. After some time, in 2004, he invited her to his Pentecostal church. Within weeks, they decided to marry, adhering to the church's expectation for immediate marriage. Amber was 19 and Timothy was 22. Soon, Amber realized the church's strictness. Women couldn't cut their hair, wear pants, makeup, or jewelry, and Timothy believed that women should be submissive to their husbands, be fruitful, and multiply. Timothy was deeply religious, dedicating himself entirely to the church. Many advised him against taking the Bible literally, but he remained steadfast. The young couple quickly had 3 children, Mara, Elias, and Natan, each born a year apart. With their growing family, they moved to Mississippi, where Timothy eventually graduated with highest honors from the state university, earning a degree in computer science and engineering. Timothy Jones Jr. managed all of this while being married, having children, and working various jobs. His family couldn't have been prouder. Tim was truly a remarkable genius with a promising future. Everything seemed to be going well for him. He landed a job as a computer chip manufacturer at Intel, which Amber saw as their ticket to a better life. After living in student housing in Mississippi, they dreamed of raising their 3 children in a bigger house and even considered hiring a nanny. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. Tim chose to buy a rundown trailer on a dirt road in Red Bank because he dreamed of living on a farm. He bought animals to raise, and Amber stayed home with the kids and the animals in this isolated area. She didn't have a car or know how to drive. By 2012, the couple had 2 more children, and problems began to arise. Tim doubted the paternity of their youngest daughter, Elaine, and wanted Amber to homeschool the children, though she only had a high school education. Amber felt increasingly isolated with no family nearby and Tim's family in Mississippi. She felt inferior to her intelligent and educated husband. Tensions escalated when Tim accused Amber of having an affair with a neighbor. The marriage crumbled and they considered divorce. Tim didn't want Amber in the children's lives, so he visited a therapist and asked for a sworn statement for his divorce lawyer, claiming he was fit to raise the children alone. Amber, without a lawyer and unsure what to do, eventually decided it was best for the children to stay with their father, as she had nothing to offer, no job or education. Tim gained primary custody as the sole financial provider, and Amber was granted regular visitation rights. She left her husband and children. Mentally, Tim was losing control, anguished by his failed marriage. He began using drugs and drinking again, struggling with the voices in his head. He became easily angered over minor things, and Amber reported that he once beat her in front of their children until she lost consciousness. Unable to manage work and home, he hired a nanny service. Despite his condition, the first two nannies noted that his home was immaculate, and he was dedicated and attentive to his children. Later, he switched services and hired 17-year-old Crystal, who had a young daughter. The nanny soon became his lover, and Tim tried to indoctrinate her into his religion, insisting she adopt the church's customs, wearing long dresses, growing her hair out, and being subordinate to him. When she refused, their relationship deteriorated. Crystal later testified that Tim was extremely harsh with his children, making them stand on their toes for hours as he believed punishment was necessary for their sick bodies. She left after catching him trying to hit her young daughter. After Crystal left, Tim hired another nanny. She noticed a drastic change in Tim. His once clean home was now filled with trash and dirty clothes, and there were even cockroaches. Over time, Timothy Jones Jr. became increasingly violent, punishing his children daily. He developed the habit of feeding them only oatmeal throughout the day, limiting them to one meal. In August 2014, the nanny contacted South Carolina's social services to report the conditions in Tim's home. She described the lack of food and the physical abuse the children suffered. The abuse was so severe that the teachers at the elementary school, attended by the older children, had already reported it to the agency months earlier. The agency had previously required Jones to sign a written promise never to mistreat or hit his children again, as they often arrived at school with bruises. When asked about the injuries, the children said their father would grab them by the neck and slam them against the wall. On the afternoon of Thursday, August 28, 2014, Tim picked up his 3 older children from elementary school, then his 2 younger ones from the nanny. Around 7 p.m., Timothy got angry about some broken outlets in their mobile home. He questioned his 6-year-old son, Natan, about the damage. When Natan said he didn't know, Timothy forced Natan to do push-ups, squats, and other exercises before having him repeat the circuit over and over again. Whenever Natan would slow down, Timothy would whip him with a belt. While Natan was being punished, Amber, Tim's ex-wife, called to speak with her children. The calls were logged at 7 o'clock, 7:02, 7:05, and 7:09, until Timothy finally answered at 7:10. During the call, Natan told his mother about the punishment for the broken outlets, saying it was an accident. Enraged, Timothy ended the call, telling Amber to stop protecting the boy. After hours of torture, Natan was exhausted, dehydrated, and begging for it to end. He collapsed, putting an end to it all. Timothy carried him to bed and left him alone without water or aid. Phone records show that Amber tried to call back 8 more times. At 8:30, Timothy searched for an explicit scene from the movie American History on YouTube, despite knowing his son was already unresponsive. Around 1 a.m., Jones took his 8-year-old daughter, Mara, to a local convenience store to buy 10 packs of cigarettes. Upon returning home, he grabbed Mara and began to strangle her. Next, Timothy went to his 7-year-old son, Elias, and did the same thing. After that, he removed his belt and went to Gabriel, who was 2, and Elaine, who was 1. He placed the belt around their necks and pulled until they stopped breathing. Seeing that none of the children were moving, he took their sheets and blankets, wrapped them separately, and placed them in the back seat of his car. On Friday, August 29th, Jones's father called him at around 7:43 a.m., but there was no answer. At 9:36, the nanny called, and on her second attempt, Jones answered. She asked if he would be dropping the younger kids at daycare, and he told her not to worry, saying he would take them next week, mentioning that they were out and would return by Tuesday. That morning, he drove from place to place. Between noon and 2 p.m., he searched online for drugs out of state. At 12:17, Jones was near Alabama, and his grandmother called him multiple times, but he did not answer and continued to ignore her messages throughout the day, totaling 23 attempts. Between 3 and 5 p.m., Jones searched online for tobacco shops in Alabama and Mississippi and for camping sites in South Carolina. At 8:04 p.m., his location was recorded in Georgia. The next day, August 30th, his grandmother continued sending messages, asking why he wasn't responding to her calls. His phone's location was recorded in Red Bank, New Jersey. On August 31st at 10:08 a.m., Jones searched the internet for camping stores and RV parks in South Carolina landfills, Lexington County landfills, and animal services, in addition to 2 songs. At 4:54 p.m., the nanny texted Timothy Jones Jr. to remind him to bring diapers when he dropped off Gabriel and Elaine on Tuesday. An hour later, he replied, saying he had left South Carolina with the children to start fresh and asked her to clean the mobile home, offering her to take whatever she wanted from the belongings he left behind. His ex-wife called him at 7 p.m., but he did not answer. On September 1st, he was driving from place to place. The next morning at 10:35, he searched the internet for body in landfill, how to make muriatic acid, camping near Colombia, countries with no extradition laws, and facing legal problems, where should I run? Throughout the day, he received text messages from the nanny informing him she had cleaned the mobile home. His boss at Intel also messaged him, asking if he was coming to work. At around 6 p.m., Amber called, but he did not answer. On the morning of September 3rd, a co-worker called twice without getting a response. Later, Timothy was captured on surveillance video at a well-known store, buying a saw, muriatic acid, garbage bags, a 5-gallon bucket, and goggles. At 3:37 a.m., he searched online for Tim Jones's missing children. His location was recorded in Charleston, South Carolina. At 6:33 a.m. on September 4th, he was seen at a bank, depositing a check for $3,518. The next day, September 5th, his location was tracked to Louisville, Georgia. His phone was only turned on once that day. On the morning of September 6th, Jones placed the decomposing bodies of his children in black plastic garbage bags and left them in a clearing along a forest road in a rural area in Alabama. This was recorded at 9:14 a.m. The bodies had been in the back seat of Timothy Jones Jr.'s vehicle since August 29th. By 7 p.m. on September 6th, he was stopped at a traffic checkpoint in Smith County, Mississippi. A police officer approached the vehicle and noticed a putrid odor emanating from inside. Additionally, the carpet appeared to be stained with bleach, as if it had been recently cleaned. The sheriff requested Jones's identification and the car's registration. He observed that Jones seemed to be under the influence of drugs. Upon checking his information, the police officer found out he was wanted in South Carolina over a child welfare issue. When asked about his children's whereabouts, Jones first claimed he had no children, then said he had 3 children who were in South Carolina. The officers asked for the phone numbers of his father, grandmother, and ex-wife to verify the children's safety. After making the calls, they immediately arrested Jones. The police mentioned that as soon as Jones was placed in the patrol car, he became emotional and started telling the officers what he had done to the children. He explained that he felt a deep sorrow and angered because one of his sons was playing with an electrical outlet. He grabbed the boy by the neck and choked him until he passed out. After that, he did the same to his other son, using a belt because his hands were too large. When his eldest daughter walked in and saw what was happening, he grabbed her and choked her with his hands until she turned purple. In another account, Jones said that when he saw his son playing with the electrical outlet, he believed the boy was trying to harm him, which led him to kill his son. In an audio recording, investigators are heard discussing how Timothy Jones Jr. forced his 6-year-old son, Nathan, to do hours of physical exercises after the boy accidentally turned off the electrical outlets in the family's living room. Jones told investigators that he eventually sent Nathan to bed, only to find him dead later when he checked on him. When asked why he did it, Jones mentioned that he killed his children because he heard voices in his head and believed his children were conspiring against him. He also thought his children would be happier in heaven. During his days on the run, Jones traveled through the Southeast with the bodies of his 5 children under blankets in his car. He ultimately dumped their bodies in a remote forest in Alabama before being arrested by chance during a routine traffic stop in Mississippi. By September 9th, after giving his second statement, Tim claimed he didn't mean to do it. He said the punishment imposed on Nathan got out of hand, and when he went to the boy's room, he found him lifeless due to the strenuous exercises. Not knowing what to do, he decided to end the lives of all his children. The pathologist mentioned that after the autopsy, she couldn't definitively establish the cause of death. However, she suggested that Nathan might have been so weakened from the excessive exercise that it didn't take much force for his father to finish him off. Investigators questioned why Jones didn't call 911 if it was truly an accident. Instead, he tried to hide and dispose of his children. That same day, Tim agreed to lead investigators to the location where he had dumped the bodies. On September 10th, the remains of his 5 children were recovered. On September 11th, the evidence collected from Jones's car was turned over to South Carolina authorities. Among the items cataloged were family photos, children's clothing, drawings by the children, letters to the children written by their mother Timothy Jones's diploma from Mississippi State University, and Jones's passport. There were also handwritten notes by Timothy Jones Jr., which included to-do lists such as removing bodies, grinding bones into powder or small pieces, burning bodies, and items like camping supplies, gas, and muriatic acid. On September 13, 2014, Jones was admitted to a correctional institution and placed in a special cell, away from the general population. Since his incarceration, Jones has been evaluated by mental health professionals, including psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, and forensic experts. Opinions among these professionals varied. Some diagnosed him with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, or personality disorder, suggesting that his mental state at the time of the crime might have been worsened by drug use and the traumatic brain injury he suffered at 15, which could have contributed to an underlying psychosis. These theories were presented to the jury during the trial. However, other specialists argued that Tim was mentally competent and that his actions to conceal evidence, including his children, indicated that he knew he had done something morally and legally wrong. His internet search history further suggested he knew exactly what he was doing and what needed to be done. The prosecution argued that Tim cracked under the stress of a broken marriage and the demands of caring for 5 young children. According to his statements, the trigger for his actions was his wife's alleged infidelity with their neighbor at the time, who is now her husband. She testified that she never committed adultery and that her relationship with the neighbor began after her divorce. The trial took place in late May 2019, involving weeks of intense testimonies and evidence presented against Timothy. The crime is considered one of the worst murders in South Carolina's history. Mara's last words to her father were, "Daddy, I love you." When police searched the house after the crime, they found Natan's favorite toy from Toy Story, broken into pieces. Natan seemed to be the most severely punished, yet all testimonies agreed on one thing: the children loved their father. On June 13, 2019, after 2 hours of deliberation, Timothy Jones Jr. was sentenced to death. He is currently in solitary confinement at a correctional institution, wearing a green jumpsuit that identifies him as a death row inmate. This tragic case ended the lives of innocent children due to marital problems, with both the father and mother making irreversible mistakes. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
She kind of came out and I tried to hold her and she's breathing. She doesn't have a heartbeat.
So now, what do you do when you realize that she's not going to make it?
I have to bury her. I couldn't tell anybody.
Kim and Scott Richardson had a happy marriage, and their love and commitment brought their firstborn Skylar into the world on March 9, 1999. Later, they welcomed Jackson. Both children grew up in a peaceful environment. Weekends were family bonding times at home. Neighbors often saw them in their backyard, where Kim and Scott would grill food and work in the garden. Skylar and Jackson enjoyed playing with the family dogs, their laughter filling the air. Family celebrations, including birthdays, holidays, and graduations, took place around bonfires in the yard, which had witnessed countless joyful moments. It was a refuge of peace. No one could have imagined that in this backyard, amidst the Richardson family's happiness, an unutterable secret was buried. As Skylar grew older, weight and diet, issues that sometimes hide behind a seemingly perfect facade, played a central role in her life. These concerns became her obsession, leading to unexpected and painful situations. For Kim, the impact of these issues was undeniable. Her worry began in Skylar's early adolescence when her daughter already showed signs of eating disorders. At 12 years old, Skylar was obsessed with calories, refusing to buy gum because it added 5 calories to her diet. She attended high school in Ohio, excelling as a cheerleader. Being a cheerleader required her to be small and agile, traits she had, making her a perfect flyer. This role involved performing aerial stunts and holding complex poses for a few seconds before returning to the ground. However, the pressure to stay thin marked the beginning of Skylar's struggle with her weight. Her obsession with not gaining even a gram led to dangerous behaviors like induced vomiting, but when the cheerleading season ended, Skylar would binge eat. She then subjected herself to severe fasting periods. Discussing her weight was a taboo topic in the family, and Skylar's extremely reserved nature made addressing the issue difficult. The Richardsons sought professional help, including doctors, therapists, and nutritionists, but no intervention seemed to ease her suffering. Skylar was diagnosed with body dysmorphia, a disorder characterized by an obsession with perceived physical flaws. Amid her dissatisfaction with herself, she became increasingly reserved and kept numerous secrets, deeply worrying her parents. However, from the outside, everything seemed perfect at home. Skylar was seen as a beautiful and popular young woman during her high school years, excelling as a cheerleader and radiating vitality and joy in her school community. Her younger brother Jackson was on the football team at the same school, which contributed to the Richardson family's reputation as exemplary. In late July 2016, just before her senior year of high school, Skylar started a relationship with a friend's cousin, but it ended quickly. However, in January 2017, she found a new love, Brandon, a junior at her school. Skylar seemed happy and even appeared to be gaining weight, which gave her family hope. This change suggested that Skylar had her eating disorder under control. Her choice of a form-fitting dress for prom and her healthy appearance increased her parents' confidence in her well-being. In March, Skylar even went on a family vacation, wearing a two-piece bikini showing some curves. Skylar and Brandon's relationship seemed to be going well, and her mother's concerns led her to address a sensitive topic: pregnancy. Kim wanted Skylar to take measures to protect herself, so she took her to the gynecologist in April. At this point, Skylar was 18 years old, so she went into the exam room alone. What should have been a routine visit for a contraceptive prescription turned traumatic for Skylar. Her tears as she left the office indicated something troubling, but Kim assumed it was due to it being her first visit, which can be emotional and somewhat invasive for a reserved girl like her daughter. Little did her mother know that the cause of her tears was a shocking revelation. The doctor informed Skylar that she was pregnant, and not just newly pregnant. She was already 8 months along. Skylar desperately asked the doctor to keep this secret, as her parents couldn't know. 9 days after the gynecologist visit on May 5, 2017, Skylar attended prom with Brandon. Despite being in her advanced pregnancy, her form-fitting dress fit her surprisingly well. It's worth noting that she had tried on the same dress in February, and it fit the same 3 months later. Apparently, she hadn't gained any weight in those 90 days, which is highly unusual for someone so far along in pregnancy. Perhaps that's why no one noticed the secret that was about to change her life forever. Less than 48 hours after attending prom, nature took its course, and it was time for the baby to be born. In the early hours of May 7th, Skylar gave birth to a small baby girl in the bathroom of the Richardson home. The newborn, apparently lifeless, became a dark secret that Skylar feared her parents would discover. In a panic, she decided to bury the baby in the backyard of their home. No one knew about this incident. In the weeks that followed, Skylar continued her life, outwardly acting as if nothing had happened. She didn't tell anyone about the tragic event that haunted her. In July 2017, she visited her gynecologist again and asked for a contraceptive prescription. As expected, the doctor asked what had happened with her pregnancy. She replied that her baby had been stillborn and that she had buried the body in the backyard of her family's home. Unbeknownst to her, revealing this secret set justice in motion, the police received a concerning call from a doctor who reported that after a gynecology and obstetrics consultation, a patient had given birth at home and buried the baby in the backyard. This call triggered a series of events that shook the Richardson family to its core. Kim and Scott were taken aback when the police arrived at their door on July 14, 2017. It was a sunny summer day, and Skylar was at her grandmother's pool, enjoying happy moments with her boyfriend and cousins. She had no idea they were coming for her. The family was entirely unaware of the gravity of the situation when the police contacted them. According to Scott's later statements, the police assured them that they only wanted to talk to Skylar about something she might have witnessed and insisted she was not in any trouble. Trusting those words, Scott took his daughter to the police station without proper legal representation, an action he would later consider one of the biggest mistakes of his life. On that same July 14th, when Scott accompanied his daughter to the police station, he had no idea that she had been hiding such a dark secret. At the station, the officers asked him to wait outside since Skylar was an adult. Inside an interrogation room, a police officer read Skylar her rights and began pressuring her to reveal what had happened with her baby.
So just kind of help me, walk through this. So what did you do? I guess, is your bedroom upstairs or bathroom upstairs? Okay, so you had to walk downstairs?
I had to clean myself up a little.
Are you carrying her?
Yes.
Did you go into the garage, or do you have an outdoor shed where you have a shovel?
My garage.
The family was about to face a crisis that would impact their lives in unimaginable ways. In the small interrogation room, Skylar finally shared the truth with the investigators.
Please, just be honest, what's going to happen?
I don't know, okay? I'm in here observing.
Jail?
No. You're not going to jail. No.
No, and I'm not going to.
Just relax, okay? Listen, just relax, okay?
I don't want to go to jail.
I know you don't. Just relax,
I don't have to go to jail, though, right?
Listen, I understand that you're sorry, and I understand that you're upset, and I understand that you didn't want this to happen, okay? Just take some deep breaths, okay? Things will be okay.
I don't have to go to jail.
You're not going to jail.
In the early hours of May 7th, Skylar faced the unimaginable alone in her bathroom. She gave birth to a baby who showed no signs of life. She held the newborn for hours, hoping for a miracle that never came. Resigned to the heartbreaking reality and ensuring not to wake her family, she quietly buried her daughter in a makeshift grave in their backyard using a small garden trowel. During a tense interrogation that followed, the investigator eventually disclosed to Skylar's parents, Scott and Kim, the grave reason for their daughter's questioning. Shocked by the news and unable to comprehend how they had missed the signs of her pregnancy, they listened as Skylar shared the baby's name, Annabelle, and revealed the brief relationship with the father, a cousin of a friend from the previous summer. This revelation devastated her mother, Kim, who later expressed her anguish over the pain Skylar had endured alone. As the family absorbed this new reality, investigators were already moving towards their home to dig deeper into the case, unbeknownst to them. The small town quickly buzzed with the news as police activity spiked in an area unaccustomed to such attention, drawing national media to the story of the troubled young cheerleader. That same day, authorities exhumed the remains of baby Annabelle for forensic examination. After enduring over 5 hours of grueling questions at the station, Skylar and her parents were allowed to go home. However, the respite was short-lived. 6 days later, the investigators returned with unsettling news from the autopsy. There were signs of charring on Annabelle's bones, suggesting she had been burned, which led them to suspect homicidal violence. On July 20th, 2017, during a second intense interview without her legal or parental support, Skylar was directly accused by police of killing and burning her baby. Throughout the interview, she steadfastly refuted the allegations, denying any use of heat or fire 17 times, and insisting 29 times that Annabelle was stillborn, maintaining her innocence against the grave charges laid before her.
Did you hear any crying after? Or did you hear any little crying? Okay.
Under the intense pressure of the interrogation, Skylar eventually changed her story, admitting that she might have partially burned the baby's body. When asked if the baby had made any noises at birth, she hesitantly mentioned that there might have been a sound. After an hour of intense questioning, the detectives decided they had enough to arrest her and charged her with reckless homicide, suspecting the baby had suffocated. Skylar was released on bail, but this was just the beginning of her legal battles. The prosecutor publicly laid out the charges: aggravated murder, which could lead to a life sentence, involuntary manslaughter, child endangerment, and abuse of a corpse. He argued that Skylar's actions were driven by her family's desire to maintain a perfect facade. Despite these heavy accusations, Skylar's parents, Kim and Scott, remained determined to clear her name with the help of their lawyers. Scott voiced his frustration over how the police had misled them from the beginning, telling them Skylar wasn't in trouble, only to detain her and search their home for evidence once they brought her to the station. Kim described the ordeal as a nightmare, noting how Skylar's arrest reignited her struggles with eating disorders and psychological stress. The legal drama attracted intense media scrutiny and public speculation, resulting in a gag order, although by then the Richardsons were already facing widespread criticism and hostility. Online and outside their home, the family endured harsh criticism, protests, and threats, feeling under constant surveillance and harassed by people who distorted their images online. Amid this turmoil, they hired experienced defense attorneys who contended that Skylar's confession was coerced. The case took a twist when the pathologist who initially reported charring on the baby's remains withdrew her statement, confirming there was no evidence of burning. Despite this new evidence, the prosecutor stood firm on the charges, insisting on the validity of Skylar's initial admissions during the interrogation. However, the defense succeeded in getting Skylar placed under house arrest. At home, surrounded by books and her dogs, she tried to find some peace under a pine tree where her parents had placed an angel ornament at the burial site of her baby, whom she called Angel. In a reflective interview, Scott explained that from Skylar's perspective, she was handling the sudden and tragic event the best she could, believing the baby was still born. He detailed how she tenderly placed the baby in the ground and marked the spot with a flower. As time passed, her dreams of attending the University of Cincinnati had to be put on hold. The uncertainty of her future weighed heavily on her and her family. However, the prosecution viewed this as her undergoing the justice process that was deemed necessary, aiming to seek justice for the baby. The case itself was fraught with tension and division. Kim, Skylar's mother, voiced her frustrations with the legal process, feeling that the defense's points were completely disregarded by the prosecution, which she found to be exceedingly cold and dismissive. The prosecution maintained that an innocent life had been unjustly taken, and it was their duty to seek reparation. In July 2019, the case took an unexpected turn when the prosecutor offered Skylar a deal: drop the aggravated murder charge if she pleaded guilty to the remaining charges, thus avoiding a trial but still facing up to 15 years in prison. This proposal brought immense anguish to the Richardson family, but ultimately, the decision rested with Skylar. On one decisive Sunday morning, Skylar resolved not to plead guilty to crimes she maintained she did not commit. She chose to let a jury decide her fate at trial. 2 years after the distressing events, the trial began on September 3, 2019. The prosecution started with a startling revelation, quoting a text message from Skylar to her mother that exposed her troubled emotional state shortly after she secretly gave birth and buried the baby in the backyard. The prosecution also displayed a selfie Skylar had taken at the gym that same day, using these pieces to argue that Skylar had no intention of keeping the baby. Although proving the baby was born alive was a challenge, the prosecution contended that Skylar's own admissions during interrogation supported their case. Witnesses for the prosecution testified that Skylar had seen the baby's arms move and heard her make sounds, suggesting life. They also claimed Skylar might have inadvertently harmed the baby. Moreover, they accused her of trying to burn the baby's remains. Trey Johnson, presented as the baby's father, testified about their brief relationship and the unprotected sexual encounters they had. When it was time for the defense, Skylar's lawyers argued that she had been subjected to overly aggressive questioning, leading to a coerced confession. They disputed the assumption that she had attempted to burn her baby, noting that the forensic expert who initially supported this claim had later withdrawn it. They presented evidence of Skylar's significant weight fluctuations due to her long-standing battle with anorexia, which they claimed was exacerbated by her mother's pressure to remain thin. During the trial, the doctor who performed the autopsy testified that the baby died from homicidal violence of undetermined origin. Yet, under cross-examination, she admitted there was no physical evidence to support a live birth, or that Skylar had directly caused harm to her child. Witnesses for the prosecution also acknowledged the lack of physical evidence of a live birth, with no trauma or burns found on the baby's remains. The defense stressed that the only evidence suggesting a live birth came from Skylar's statements, which they argued were the result of coercion by the police. An obstetrician also testified that he didn't believe the baby was alive at birth. He noted that the umbilical cord wasn't cut, which might mean it came off before or during delivery. He also mentioned how Skylar described the baby as extremely pale, not looking like a healthy newborn. He suggested that Skylar's eating disorder might have limited the baby's growth in the womb, possibly leading to a stillbirth or death shortly after birth. An expert on police questioning explained that some interrogation techniques can push people into false confessions, especially those who are more vulnerable to pressure. A clinical psychologist who talked to Skylar found she has a dependent personality disorder, which could make her more likely to give in to authority figures. The trial moved forward with both sides presenting their arguments and evidence. The defense attorney emphasized that Skylar is innocent until proven guilty, urging the jury to stand by her if they had any doubts about the baby's condition at birth. The prosecution argued that Skylar had ended a life to keep up appearances and should be held accountable. The trial was intense, and eventually, the jury had to decide Skylar's fate.
With regard to count one, we, the jury in the above captioned case, find the defendant, Brooke Skylar Richardson, not guilty of the offense of aggravated murder.
On September 12, 2019, after 4 hours, they ruled she wasn't guilty of the most serious charges, but did find her guilty of improperly handling the baby's remains, which could mean up to a year in jail. The Richardson family was relieved by the verdict but had to wait until sentencing. The next day, Skylar spoke publicly for the first time in court, expressing regret and apologizing for the pain caused by her actions. During a victim impact statement, Trey Johnson's mother spoke about her deep loss, saying no words could fully express her anguish over her granddaughter Annabelle's death. The judge believed different choices by Skylar could have saved her daughter, but sentenced her to 3 years of probation instead of a harsher penalty. The trial and its aftermath deeply affected Skylar and her family, causing her significant stress and health issues. 2 months after being mostly acquitted, Skylar shared her feelings in an interview with Cosmopolitan magazine. She talked about her regrets and the burden of guilt she carries every day for not opening up sooner about her situation. She described the period as devastating and admitted to struggling with depression since the incident. Skylar shared that she named her baby Annabelle because she didn't know anyone else with that name. She visits Annabelle's grave every week to leave pink flowers and finds a bit of peace knowing her baby is at rest. During an interview, Skylar opened up about how the trial almost broke her and even made her think about ending her life. She admitted that living with the truth was incredibly hard, especially when it felt like everyone else thought differently. She also felt like she lost a part of herself during the trial and was scared that people saw her as guilty because of all the news coverage. Trey, Annabelle's dad, told the media that he was shocked by the case because he didn't know about the pregnancy beforehand. It hit him hard when he found out months later in 2018, especially learning about it through social media when everything went public. Trey's family deeply felt the loss, and after the trial, they gathered to mark 2 years since Annabelle's passing. This whole situation really affected everyone involved. They all dealt with a lot of emotions no matter how the court ruled. Over time, Skylar got help for her eating disorders, went to college, and worked at the law firm that represented her. Her probation ended almost 2 years early in 2020. The judge decided there was no need to keep an eye on her since the crime wasn't severe. She had no prior offenses, and she was busy with work and school. In Skylar's first TV interview, her parents talked about how the case impacted them and their daughter. They mentioned a special angel marker at Annabelle's gravesite, expressing how heartbreaking it all was and how sometimes being near the grave brought them a little comfort. They also revealed that Skylar was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, suffering from frequent panic attacks and nightmares that often kept her from sleeping in her own room. In 2022, Skylar's lawyers tried to seal the court records of her conviction to help her move on, arguing that the public didn't need to see them anymore. But the prosecutors disagreed, saying it would lessen how serious her actions were. The judge ultimately decided to restrict access to the records, siding with Skylar's need for privacy, which stirred up new debates. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.